I was playing some Yakuza 6 on stream and somebody said to me, hey, did you know FEX is actually a Valve project? I said, well, no, they're using it on the Steam frame and they're probably going to fork it. Someone else said, did you know Valve has actually been funding FEX from the very start? I said, no, they're using FEX, that's not what's happening. And then someone else said the exact same thing. At this point, I was like, okay, where did everyone get this idea from? Somebody give me a link. And yeah, turns out these weren't chatters just saying something stupid. That actually happened. Not only is FEX an MIT-licensed open source project used for running x86 code on an ARM-based system, for example, being part of the gaming pipeline on Asahi Linux, and if you've used any of those Steam games on an Android phone apps, usually FEX is part of their pipeline as well, amongst various other things they might be using. There are some things besides FEX, but FEX is quite popular. And recently, Ryan Hodek, the project founder and lead developer of FEX, posted a 7-year anniversary post and had this to say. Hey everyone, in light of the recent product announcements using FEX, I want to take a moment to celebrate our anniversary. On this day 7 years ago, 28th November 2018, I landed the first commit in the prototype project that would eventually become FEX-MU. I want to thank the people from Valve for being here from the start and allowing me to kickstart this project. They trusted me with the responsibility of designing and frameworking the project in a way that it can work long-term, not only for their use cases, but also keeping it an open project that anyone can adapt for their own use cases. So this post isn't actually new. This was posted about a week ago, and I guess unless you were in the FEX development space or you were using FEX, nobody heard about this. Nobody knew this was going on. So what Ryan is saying here is basically, at least for the main guy behind the project, Valve has literally just been supporting his work and was part of the creation of this project. But let's just say it's not entirely crystal clear. Let's just say maybe Valve has been interested in ARM, maybe they've been providing some hardware, some early funding, maybe trying to encourage the developer to keep the project going. Now, the reason why people are actually talking about this now, and the thing that makes it far more explicit, is a very recent interview with Pierre-Loup Griffiths of Valve. This is from The Verge. Steam machine today, Steam phones tomorrow. Now that's a very extravagant headline. There is no confirmation of a Steam phone. Don't get your hopes up too high for that. That's not something they actively have planned, but we will get to that. If you remember a lot of the early Steam Deck related interviews, Pierre was very involved in basically every single one of them. This is someone who's been at Valve for quite a long time now. Thanks to a stack of open source technology, including a compatibility layer called Proton and an emulator called FEX, games that were developed for x86-based Windows PCs can now run on Linux-based phones with an ARM processor architecture. With Proton, the Steam Deck could already do the Windows to Linux part. Now FEX is bridging the x86 and ARM too. This stack is what powers the Steam Frame's own ability to play Windows games, of course, and it was widely reported that Valve is using the open source emulator to make it happen. What wasn't widely reported is that Valve is behind FEX itself. In an interview, Valve's Pierre-Loup Griffiths, one of the architects behind SteamOS and the Steam Deck, tells The Verge that Valve has been quietly funding almost all of the open source technologies required to play Windows games on ARM, and because they're open source, Valve is effectively shepherding a future where ARM phones, laptops, and desktops could freely do the same. He says the company believes game developers shouldn't be wasting time porting games if there's a better way. This is something very interesting because early on in the whole Linux gaming space, there was this big push for native gaming. Remember the early Steam machines? They wanted developers to actually make games for Linux. They realized that this wasn't going to happen anytime soon. They didn't have the same push they would have for something like the PlayStation, the Xbox, the Switch, or whatever Nintendo happens to do in the future. It didn't have that same push of Windows, which had the majority of the market share, or macOS, which, whilst not being the majority, was still a big enough market share to justify that sort of endeavor. Linux was this like small platform, and to make it possible to compete in that space, they had to approach it in a different way. And that different way is taking existing games and making them compatible on this different operating system. This comes with problems, but it has created a legitimate gaming market on Linux. Remember when the Steam Deck handheld showed that a decade of investment in Linux could make Windows gaming portable? Valve paid open source developers to follow their passions. To help achieve that result, Valve has been guiding the effort to bring games to ARM in much the same way. In 2016 and 2017, Griffiths tells me the company began recruiting and funding open source developers to bring Windows games to ARM chips. FEX lead developer Ryan Hodek tells The Verge he chatted with Griffiths himself at conferences those years and whipped up the first prototype in 2018. He tells me Valve pays enough that FEX is his full-time job. Not like a part-time thing that he spends some time doing. Full-time job. He's a full-time contractor for Valve. This is about as clear-cut as it gets. And this is not the only person who's been in this situation. I've mentioned it a number of times, but DXVK. This started outside of Valve and wasn't initially funded, but DXVK, the developer for this, was paid to do so after the fact by Valve, and that's the reason it has been able to keep going like it has been, and a bunch of other things, all the exact same way. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the way that Valve is interacting with open source, like, I wish more companies did this. And yes, there are companies that do, donate to projects, and maybe someone who's paid by a company works on a project here and there, but actually hiring the developer of an open source project they rely on, not making it closed source, not making them do something where it wouldn't work outside of their ecosystem, just letting them make the best project they can. Now, there's one very important thing not being reported on. The fact that Valve has been funding FEX turns out was an open secret that nobody actually realized. It was right in front of us the entire time, and nobody noticed. So this is the website, when it decides to load, of Alyssa Rosenzweig. This is someone who does a lot of development in the FOSS space, in GPU development, Asahi Linux, various different things, and there is a public resume here. Let's take a look at it. Under the section of Valve Independent Contractor / Self-Employed, optimized FEX's dynamic recompilation to ensure smooth gameplay under emulation. This wasn't added like a day ago. This has been here for quite a while now. Again, it was a basically open secret. It was right there. Nobody was hiding it. Nobody was talking about it, though. And here is a comment from Sadly It's Bradley, otherwise known as Brad Lynch, who is a very prolific Valve data diver. If you ever heard about the Valve Fremont or Valve Deckard, which now became the Steam Machine and the Steam Frame, it was probably from this person. Around then, that being back in 2019, I started hearing whispers that Valve was funding the FEX project, which is an x86 64 to ARM emulator on Linux, and they were testing running SteamVR in early demos of that work. I had trouble believing this. I often got false info from trolls back then. This was posted a year ago. This was back in September of 2024. Again, open secret. Now, there's a lot of other stuff being said in this interview. A lot of it is just like, hey, why are you using ARM? How does all this tech fit together? All this good stuff. I want to focus on a couple of specific parts, though. Is the ARM version of SteamOS a separate operating system? Basically, no, it's built from the same components as Arch Linux, all that good stuff. The second part, though, so when you're looking at SteamOS on ARM, you're really looking at the same thing. Instead of downloading the normal Proton that's built for x86 and targets x86 games, it will also be able to download a Proton that's ARM aware, that has a bulk of its code compiled for ARM, and can also include the FEX emulator. What I hope this means is it'll be available outside of SteamOS, because this would mean they would have a ARM-based Steam client. And if they have an ARM-based Steam client for SteamOS, why not make that available more generally? And for people running Linux on ARM, they could also use this. They've done the same basically with the regular version of Proton. Why wouldn't they do so with the ARM version? This is not being confirmed. I would find it very unlikely they don't do so. Valve started FEX? Question mark. Proton is also something where you could say we started it, but because it's a derivative of Wine, it's less clear-cut. Whereas FEX, we were talking with a few developers that we knew were the right fit for an undertaking like that, a long-term thing that needed a very specific set of experts. We worked hard on trying to convince these guys to start the project and have been funding them ever since. So not only funding them, but the reason the project was started is discussions directly with Valve. So this is a Valve project in basically every sense of the term. Now, phones. Phones. Will there be a SteamOS phone? Will you bring non-gaming apps into the store in a big way? Linux phones are basically a meme right now. There's no one actually seriously building a Linux phone. Yes, there's a couple of companies that have some early projects, and yes, there are some companies where they are selling an Android device that is now running Linux, and those tend to work better, but it's not really like... It's not like Linux gaming, right? Where there's actually a market that people are trying to get involved in. We have done things around phones with the Steam Link app. I don't know if that's going to be a big focus for us to develop local content or try to develop SteamOS for devices like that. I mean, I'm not discounting any possibility, but I think with just the living room, handheld, and desktop, trying to have a good outcome for gaming applications and everything else you'd want to do on a desktop, we have a ton of work to do. So, at least for now, if you are one of those people that are running an app that plays Windows games on your phone, Valve is not putting you out of business yet. Maybe someday, though. Is ARM the future of handheld gaming, or is it just something for headsets? I'm sure a lot of people are questioning whether or not a new Steam Deck is going to be ARM-based. I've seen a lot of people saying, ooh, they could maybe do that, and maybe they could do that. I don't know. I think ARM devices are definitely a good fit for lower performance, like anything lower than Steam Deck. But it's possible it'll be a good option for something on the order of the Steam Deck performance envelope. We don't really try to steer the market one direction or another. We just want to make sure that good options are always supported. This is the most non-committal answer that I have ever heard. It's like, yeah, we might make it, or we might not. If it's good, then it's good. If it's bad, then it's bad. What it sounds like to me is they're probably pretty far along planning a Steam Deck 2, and a Steam Deck 2 is probably still going to be x86 based. If they decide to do something further down the line with a third Steam Deck, maybe the market shifts by then, but they don't know. At least he's not willing to leak anything, is where we are today. So Valve, and any of the open source projects around Valve, I don't make videos on the weekend, so can we maybe stop with the announcements and the reveals for at least, 2 days? I want to take some days off, and then let's get back to it next week, and bring on the announcements then, because I don't want to make any more videos this week. I want to go do something else. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of this announcement? Do you think it's really cool they've been funding FEX the entire time? Are you interested to see maybe there are other projects they've been funding? I know I certainly am. And yeah, apparently not Waydroid, because Waydroid has no idea what's been going on. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video, let me know your thoughts down below, and go subscribe if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I really do like the work Valve is doing.